At dawn on July 23, 1945, something impossible happened on the coast of Japan. Not bombs from the sky, not paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines, not an invading army. A U.S. submarine, silent and unseen beneath the waves, surfaced just meters from Japanese soil. Its hatch opened. American sailors stepped onto enemy land, rifles in hand. Within minutes, a Japanese train was ripped apart by gunfire. Its cars shattered, its soldiers killed, and its tracks left burning. And then, the Americans vanished back into the ocean. This was not a movie scene. This was not propaganda. This was the only confirmed U.S. ground attack on the Japanese home islands during World War II, and almost no one knows it happened. This is the story of USS Barb, the submarine that didn't just sink ships. It invaded Japan itself. By 1945, the Pacific War had turned brutally one-sided. Japan's navy was shattered, its air force crippled, and its cities burning under relentless American bombing raids. Yet beneath the waves, U.S. submarines were still fighting a quieter, deadlier war, cutting Japan's lifelines, strangling its supply routes, and sinking cargo ships faster than they could be replaced. Among these submarines was USS Barb, SS-220, a Gato-class submarine already feared by Japanese sailors. But what made Barb different wasn't just her kill count. It was her captain. Commander Eugene Lucky Fluckey was not a man who followed rulebooks. He believed submarines were not meant to merely fire torpedoes and disappear. They were meant to terrorize the enemy, to strike where Japan felt safest, its own coastline. Fluckey was young, aggressive, and dangerously creative. His men adored him. Naval Command tolerated him, because every time Fluckey broke convention, results followed. By mid-1945, USS Barb had already sunk or damaged more than 30 Japanese vessels, including warships and heavily defended transports. But Fluckey wanted more. He wanted to prove that Japan's home islands were not untouchable, and that idea began forming during Barb's 11th War Patrol, when the submarine was ordered to prowl the coast of Karafuto, southern Sakhalin, territory controlled by Japan, fortified and assumed safe from direct American attack. Safe until Barb arrived. A dangerous idea is born. Late one night, as Barb crept along the coastline, Fluckey noticed something strange through his periscope. Along the shore ran railway tracks hugging the coast, carrying troops and supplies between Japanese bases. Trains passed regularly, predictably, like clockwork. That's when Fluckey asked a question no submarine commander had ever seriously considered. Why don't we destroy the train? At first it sounded insane. Submarines were not designed for land combat. Surfacing near enemy territory was already risky. Sending men ashore on Japan itself was something even marine commanders hadn't done yet. But Fluckey wasn't thinking in terms of tradition. He was thinking in terms of psychological warfare. If Americans could land on Japan, even briefly, then nowhere was safe. Preparing for the impossible, Fluckey gathered a small group of volunteers, men who trusted him completely. 8 sailors stepped forward. No hesitation. They trained quickly, silently. They would go ashore at night, destroy a train, and escape before Japanese forces could react. At first, the plan involved gunfire, but Fluckey realized something even better. A timed explosive charge placed directly on the tracks. If done right, the submarine could be miles away by the time the explosion happened. It was risky, unprecedented, possibly career-ending if it failed. Naval Command was never asked, because Fluckey already knew the answer, the night of the raid. On the night of July 22, 1945, USS Barb surfaced just offshore under heavy fog. The coastline loomed close, too close. Any Japanese patrol could spot them at any moment. The 8 men climbed out, carrying explosives, rifles, and a mission that had never been attempted before. They paddled silently to shore. When their boots touched Japanese soil, history changed. No American soldier had ever launched a ground attack on the Japanese home islands. Until now, the men moved quickly. The tracks were right where Fluckey predicted. The explosive, designed by Barb's crew, was placed carefully, set with a delayed fuse. As they retreated back to the beach, they heard it. A train, coming fast, loaded with Japanese soldiers. The timing was perfect and terrifying. They pushed off just as the train thundered closer, unaware that death lay ahead. Minutes later, from the safety of the submarine, the crew of USS Barb watched the night explode. The blast lifted the locomotive off the tracks. Cars slammed into each other. Flames lit the coastline. Japanese soldiers were thrown into darkness and fire. The train was completely destroyed. USS Barb slipped beneath the waves. No alarms, no pursuit, no survivors to understand what had just happened. A message to Japan. The damage itself was small compared to bombing raids, but the message was devastating. If a submarine could land men on Japan, if Americans could strike trains on home soil, then invasion was no longer theoretical. Japanese coastal defenses were forced to spread thin. Patrols doubled. Panic replaced certainty. And USS Barb sailed away, having done something no other American unit ever did during the war. The only U.S. ground attack on Japanese soil, and the war wasn't even over yet. Japan realizes the unthinkable has happened. When the sun rose over the shattered railway line, Japanese officers stood in stunned silence. The twisted steel, the burned wooden cars, the mangled locomotive. This was not the work of sabotage from resistance fighters, nor an air raid, nor an internal accident. This destruction bore the unmistakable signature of an external enemy, one that had reached Japan without warning and vanished without a trace. Soldiers lay dead beside the tracks, some still clutching rifles they never fired. For the first time in the entire war, a simple but terrifying truth settled in. The Americans had set foot on Japanese soil and struck from the ground. At first, commanders refused to believe it. Reports were rewritten, softened, reinterpreted. Some claimed a mine had drifted ashore. Others suggested mechanical failure followed by an explosion. But none of those explanations held up. The blast pattern was deliberate, precise, tactical. This was an attack, and it had come from the sea. The coastal defenses were thrown into chaos. Japanese patrol boats rushed out, combing the nearby waters. Aircraft circled overhead, scanning for periscopes or oil slicks. Shore units searched beaches for footprints, discarded equipment, anything that could explain how an enemy force had arrived undetected. But there was nothing. No bodies, no wreckage, no sign of escape, because USS Barb was already gone. The psychological damage no one could repair. Militarily, the destroyed train was insignificant. Japan had lost hundreds of trains, thousands of ships, entire cities to firebombing. But psychologically, this was different. Bombers could be shot down, ships could be sunk, armies could be resisted. But this meant the ocean itself had betrayed them. Japanese command had long believed. The home islands were protected by distance and vigilance. Submarines were a threat to shipping, not to land. The idea that a submarine could creep up to the coastline, land men, sabotage infrastructure, and escape undetected shattered decades of naval assumptions. Security protocols were rewritten overnight. Coastal units were ordered to guard railways, an absurd task given Japan's endless shoreline. Soldiers were reassigned from cities to beaches that might never be attacked. Resources were spread thinner at the worst possible time. And deep beneath the Pacific, Commander Gene Fluckey smiled. USS Barb, now the most wanted submarine in Japan. Fluckey knew the attack would provoke an overreaction. That was the point. The real weapon wasn't the explosive, it was fear. While Japanese forces searched desperately for an enemy that no longer existed, Barb was already hunting again. The submarine moved north, prowling shipping lanes with renewed aggression. Fluckey ordered attacks at distances other commanders would avoid, firing torpedoes at near point blank, range in shallow waters where escape was nearly impossible. Depth charges exploded around the hull. The crew counted seconds between detonations. Rivets groaned. Lights flickered. Still, Barb survived during this patrol. The submarine destroyed multiple Japanese ships, including heavily escorted cargo vessels. One engagement turned into a surface gunfight, Barb firing her deck gun directly at enemy targets while tracers sliced through the darkness toward her conning tower. This wasn't how submarines were supposed to fight. But USS Barb had stopped caring about supposed to. Fluckey pushes even further. Most commanders would have considered the train attack the climax of their career. A daring one-time raid, a story to tell after the war. Fluckey saw it as proof of concept. If 8 men could land, place explosives, and escape, then what else was possible? He began planning something even more audacious, something that would strike deeper into Japan, with no warning at all, not with boots on the ground, but with a weapon no Japanese soldier had ever encountered. A submarine-launched rocket attack. At the time, submarines were not equipped to fire rockets at land targets. There was no manual, no doctrine, no approval. So Fluckey did what he always did. He improvised, using components scavenged from aircraft rockets and custom-built launch racks welded onto the deck. Barb's crew created a weapon system in secret. It was crude, dangerous, and potentially devastating. If it worked, USS Barb wouldn't just touch Japan. It would burn it, the final strike on Japan's coast. Days after the train attack, under cover of darkness, USS Barb surfaced again, this time even closer to Japanese towns. The coastline was blacked out, but buildings and factories were visible against the night sky. Fluckey gave the order. Rockets screamed off the deck, streaking toward shore. Explosions erupted among industrial targets. Fires broke out. Japanese defenders had no idea what was happening. There were no bombers overhead. No ships offshore. Only fire from nowhere. Within minutes, Barb submerged and disappeared once more. Japan had now been attacked in 3 ways by the same submarine. From beneath the sea, from the surface, and from its own land. No other U.S. vessel in World War II could claim that. The war ends and the truth emerges. Just weeks later, the war ended. Atomic bombs fell. Japan surrendered. Occupation forces arrived. And only then did the full story of USS Barb begin to surface. Japanese officers confirmed what American sailors already knew. The train attack was real. The casualties were real. The fear was real. Commander Gene Fluckey received the Medal of Honor, not just for bravery, but for redefining what naval warfare could be. USS Barb was officially credited as the only U.S. unit to conduct a ground combat operation on Japanese home islands. The 8 sailors who stepped onto that beach became ghosts of history, men who fought a war no one expected, in a place no one believed possible. Why this story was almost forgotten. There were no invasion beaches stormed, no flags raised, no victory parades for a submarine raid conducted in silence. Compared to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the story of a destroyed train seemed small. But war is not just won by force. It is won by breaking belief, and USS Barb broke. Japan's belief that its homeland was untouchable. The 8 men who walked into Japan and almost never returned. History remembers battles, not footsteps. It records explosions, not the quiet moments before them. And yet, on that fog-choked night in July 1945, 8 American sailors took steps so dangerous that one mistake, one snapped twig, one barking dog, one curious guard, would have erased their existence entirely. No rescue, no backup, no second chance. They were not commandos, not Marines, not elite special forces. They were submariners. Men trained to fight in steel tubes beneath the ocean, now preparing to walk across enemy soil with rifles slung over, their shoulders and explosives in their hands. If they were captured, they would not be prisoners of war. They would be executed. Choosing the 8. Commander Gene Fluckey did not ask for volunteers in a dramatic speech. He simply explained the mission and the risk. Anyone who stepped forward understood the unspoken truth. This operation was not officially sanctioned. If it failed, it would never exist on paper. 8 men stepped forward anyway. Among them was Lieutenant Charles O. Fox, the officer who would lead the landing. Party, calm, precise. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Each sailor was chosen for a reason: steady hands, sharp eyes, and the ability to stay silent under pressure. They memorized the shoreline, the tide tables, the timing of the trains. Then they waited. The most dangerous shoreline in the war. As the rubber raft slid into the black water, the men could hear the surf breaking against rocks. This was not a sandy beach. It was jagged, uneven, and hostile, perfect terrain for defenders. Every stroke of the paddles felt too loud. Behind them, USS Barb loomed like a shadow, her crew watching in total silence. No one spoke. No one moved. If the landing party failed, the submarine could not surface to save them. They were alone. When the raft scraped against stone, Fox was the first out. He crouched, scanning the darkness. No lights, no voices, no movement. For now, footsteps on enemy soil. The men advanced inland, hugging shadows, counting steps exactly as planned. The railway line emerged from the darkness like a thin black scar across the land. Steel rails, gravel bed, wooden ties, real solid Japanese. The explosives were assembled with hands that did not shake. A pressure-activated charge was secured, beneath the track designed, so the weight of the train itself would trigger the blast. And then everything went wrong. The moment they nearly died. A sound, low, distant, growing louder. A train whistle. It was coming too early. The timing was off. The charge was not fully set. If they rushed it, the mechanism might fail. If they waited, the train would arrive while they were still on the tracks. Fox made the decision in seconds. They finished the setup under impossible pressure, fingers working blindly, sweat freezing on their skin. The ground vibrated as the train approached. They could hear voices, laughter, boots. Japanese soldiers. They ran, not back toward the submarine, but sideways, into darkness, flattening themselves against the ground as the train thundered. Passed less than seconds after they left the tracks. Had the charge detonated early, they would have been killed instantly. Had it failed, they would be discovered. They crawled back to the raft as the fuse burned, watching death from the sea. From the deck of USS Barb, the crew waited. Every second stretched. Fluckey watched the shoreline through binoculars, knowing that if the men didn't appear soon, he would have to dive, leaving them behind forever. Then the explosion lit the night. The blast lifted the locomotive off the rails like a toy. Cars jackknifed. Fire erupted. Men were thrown into the air. The sound echoed across the coastline, and then movement. The raft emerged from the smoke. All 8 men were alive. When they climbed back aboard, no one cheered. No one celebrated. They simply sat down, breathing hard, hands shaking now that it was over. Only then did Fluckey allow himself a smile. Why this mission should have failed. By every rule of warfare, this raid was madness. No air cover, no extraction force, no contingency plan. If Japanese troops had arrived even 1 minute sooner, the outcome would have been catastrophic. And yet it worked, because the Japanese never believed it was possible. That belief, stronger than any wall or weapon, had protected their coastline. And USS Barb shattered it with 8 pairs of boots and 1 perfectly placed charge. The secret that followed them home. For years, the men could not speak about what they had done. The mission remained classified. No medals, no headlines, no recognition. They returned to civilian life carrying a truth no one would believe anyway. I walked into Japan during the war, one of them later said, and walked out. Only decades later would historians confirm it. The war ended with surrender documents and silent guns, but long before that moment, Japan had already felt something far more unsettling than bombs. It felt the presence of an enemy it never saw coming. USS Barb did not conquer territory. It did not occupy cities. Instead, it did something far more powerful. It proved that Japan's homeland was vulnerable. 8 men stepped onto enemy soil, destroyed a military train, and vanished back into the sea without a single shot fired in their defense. No invasion force followed. No announcement was made. Yet the psychological damage lingered long after the wreckage cooled. In the end, USS Barb didn't just fight the war, it rewrote the rules of it. And history almost quietly tried to forget it ever happened.